decided to broach the subject of halachic reliability, dependability, when it comes to, among other things, kashrut of other people. This is actually a very interesting topic for discussion because, well, it comprises some 40-50% of the halachic questions that I get. Rabbi, can I rely on this? Can I rely on that? Sometimes it's institutions, sometimes it's certification agencies, sometimes it's individuals. What do I do if I'm invited to a meal by so-and-so who doesn't keep such and such? And, how do I work? Yes.
I need that.
Right, and then there are other questions at play as well, some of which have to do with the reciprocity of minhagim. What if I'm in a household where they hold like this or like that? Am I entitled to rely on this or not to rely on it, etc.? If I choose not to rely on it, why am I doing that? And if so, what concerns might it bring up, and how do we abate them, etc. So, first things first, there is a very fascinating introduction to this topic in the Gemara. Believe it or not, one of the main sources in the whole discussion is the Sotah, because clearly we learn kashrut from adulterous women. You would have thought this on your own if I hadn't told you. So the story of the Sotah is as follows. A man suspects his wife of being, did I just say woman? The blues. A man suspects his wife of, slaughterhouse. A man suspects his wife of having, so not even so much of having committed adultery as much as he suspects her of secluding herself with someone, regardless of the purpose. It doesn't even matter if adultery is not the reason. If a guy knows for a fact that his wife has been disloyal to him, then he has a halachic obligation to divorce her, and that's not really a reparable situation. Not a pleasant one, but that's happened before. When it comes to the Sotah, all that happened is that her husband told her, listen, he has to name the guy specifically, and he's got to be in the presence of two witnesses, so it's not like every woman who talks to someone is automatically Sotah. A guy would have to say to his wife this time, I saw you talking to Yosef the carpenter, and I don't want you, he's a good carpenter, he's maybe even better than me, but I don't want you secluding yourself with him anymore, meaning you can talk to him in public, you can even talk to him if there's one person there. What she can't do is go into a closed space where there is no one but him and her there. Right? And it doesn't matter afterwards if she did or didn't commit adultery. At that point already, the two of them are going to separate, and then if the situation isn't resolved, then she can go to Beit HaMikdash, and the whole situation can be checked, so to speak, by the process prescribed there. We just read this in last week's parasha, not in Halakhah, but in Naso. So he needs to specify the man in question. He needs to do this in front of two witnesses. And at that point, here's the interesting deviation from otherwise normative halakha. One witness alone would be trustworthy to say, I saw her in seclusion with him. In other words, I saw the two of them go into a room, there was no one else there, or I was there and I left, and she has violated this request of non-seclusion, and therefore the process of Sotah would begin. The reason we don't have this today, very simply, we don't have Beit HaMikdash. It's impossible for us to check such a thing, and so good advice to those of us who have the good fortune of being married is that do not ever, under any circumstances, tell your wife in the presence of two men not to seclude herself with somebody, because if she does, it basically means divorce, because we can't verify anything beyond that point. So today we don't do this at all. But the surprising thing is that one witness suffices when it comes to what might happen afterwards. And from here the Gemara says, one proof of what's called Ed Echad Ne'eman Be'isurim. What does that mean? Ed Echad, one witness, Ne'eman Be'isurim.
One is like you can
relying on like the Isurim?
Yeah, one witness is reliable when it comes to things that are potentially forbidden. Wait a second. We gotta raise our eyebrows. What do you mean? One witness is not.
Shabbat, like
What happened to the rest of the entire Torah? We require what? Two witnesses. How can one witness be believed over here where everywhere else we would require two? So Gemara says, no, this is one exception to the biblical rule, but the reality is when it comes to Yisurim, you can rely on one witness, which means what? I was standing in a forest and I happened upon a bird that looked like it had been killed with a knife. If Yohan Maleh happens to march down the yellow brick road and tells me, you know, Rabbi, that bird was killed by a reliable shofet, you can eat from it. I'm allowed to trust him, even though he's a lone witness, I'm allowed to trust him and don't need to go looking for other witnesses that saw this magical shofet who kills birds and runs away. If, and for all we know, there are thousands of them. Why do we not require two witnesses as we do elsewhere on pretty much everything else? So the answer is like this. When it comes to the admissibility or acceptability of a particular item, you can rely on one witness to tell you this is not forbidden. What's isur? Isur is something that's forbidden. So for someone to tell you this is not forbidden, I can rely on this and I can say, okay, I'm therefore not going to violate a biblical concept. I don't violate any biblical precepts by eating something that someone told me was kosher. Right? Are we still friends? And you're not talking to me anyway. Okay. What happens if the person who tells me this happens not to know the Halakhot of Kashrut? Funny little caveats to the whole discussion. So I have a cousin who is not religious and who told me, Rabbi, they meet in my house. Halak, Beit Yosef. I had someone actually call it once Beit Yaakov, like, it's so kosher, it's like not even Yosef, his father would have eaten it. So what's the situation? Can I still rely on this biblical concept of one witness being enough to permit that which might otherwise have been forbidden? Incidentally, just so you know, when I say something that's like what we call an isur, we refer to the Halakhot of Kashrut. In Halakhic literature, it's referred to as Hilchot Isur v'Heter, meaning that which is permissible or forbidden. So there are a lot of areas of Halakhah that you can say this is permissible and that's forbidden, but we use it generally to refer to Kashrut. So why do I say this? When an animal's alive, I'm not allowed to eat it because it's alive, and you can't eat live animals. And you all knew that, you just wanted to hear it from me. Ever min achai is one of the 7 mitzvot of Bnei Noach. Even non-Jews can't eat live animals, so much the more so that we can't. If I find a bird or an animal that was slaughtered, that animal never became permitted until I knew it was properly slaughtered. In other words, it was forbidden while it was alive because of Ivra min achai, because you just can't eat live things. And until I know how it was killed, it remains forbidden because it goes from Ivra min achai to a potential tarifa or nevela. There are two things that can go wrong. Either the animal can have some kind of a defect that I don't know about, so maybe the meningeal membrane was pierced. So it was attacked by some wild animal, and therefore it was tarif. Even if it was properly slaughtered, it would just not be kosher. Or it was just improperly slaughtered even, and I couldn't tell. It wasn't cut with a proper knife, etc. So the Gemara says like this, it goes from forbidden to forbidden. And the only way I can permit the consumption of this thing is by someone telling me this is permissible. Even though the Torah testifies that this thing was forbidden for me to eat while it was alive, and chances are it's forbidden even after it was dead, unless it was killed by, a shochet who at least knows the halachot of shechita. So, when it comes to things that either were forbidden or had the potential to be forbidden, we can rely on one witness to permit their consumption. So, bread, cheese, meat, etc. gets a little bit dicier when you're talking about people testifying about people, but for certain purposes we're going to say this would be the question. What happens if a member of the community wants to marry someone that I don't know? So how do I know? He asked me to officiate a wedding. How do I know that this girl is Jewish? Or that this guy's conversion was properly officiated? So can I rely on the person to tell me him or herself? Do I need two witnesses? Is it enough that I get one? These are mighty involved discussions, especially when you know that there are certain situations that are more problematic than otherwise. So the general rule is like this: if you're talking about a lone witness, right, a solo witness who happens to be reasonably observant and happens to have a cursory knowledge of what's kosher and what's not, generally speaking, you can rely on such a person.
Where is this non-witness in the Sota?
In the
You said it's from the Sota that we learned that.
we would take the sotah to Beit HaMikdash and go through this whole process because one man saw her in seclusion with this guy that she was warned not to be in seclusion with, and not two men. Meaning she was warned about the guy in front of
Okay,
two.
but in this case it's not to allow something, it's to...
So either it's to permit something that was otherwise, we wouldn't take her to Beit HaMikdash if that weren't the case. We wouldn't go through all this if it weren't. That's potentially the isur. Meaning what we're doing is we're actually erasing the name of Hashem. If you're familiar with the discussion, the sotah, there's the paragraph that describes what happens to the sotah is written on parchment, and then it's erased in water, and then this is what she ends up drinking. So we don't erase the name of Hashem for as it's in fact asur b'deoraita to do this. We learn from the Torah tells us that we have an obligation to destroy altars and shrines and all houses of idolatrous worship. Lo ta'asum ken Hashem Elokeichem. The Torah tells us, don't do this to Hashem your God, which means from here we learn it's asur to break a stone in Beit HaMikdash, to damage or to carve out or to ruin anything that's associated with Beit HaMikdash. And we learn from this also to the literal name of Hashem, that you can't erase it or scratch it or cause it to no longer be valid. So
one witness is enough to allow...
one witness is enough for us to do something that would have been forbidden.
Okay. Which is erasing the name of Hashem.
Yeah.
Oh.
And at the same time, it would work the other way too. If I had one witness who comes and says, I saw your wife in seclusion with this guy, and then when I opened the door, I found out that there was another guy there. It depends on the culture. I don't even. Anyway.
It's enough to say that she was not secreted with this guy.
Well, if there was someone else there, that is a longer discussion, because if all the people involved are crazy, it's not necessarily going to help. But so what's going to happen is that the guy who told me I saw her in seclusion, and then when I checked it out, I found out it wasn't the case. We're going to believe him to permit a situation that might have had the potential to be forbidden. Maybe she should have to go and get checked, and this wouldn't be permissible until that were the case. And then he can say, no, actually, I verified and I made sure that what otherwise looked forbidden is actually permissible. A lot of examples of this. Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
My peripheral vision is a little bit...
No, I wanted to make sure you were done before I...
Go ahead, sure.
Okay. Is there a halachic equivalent for a man who lives on a rainbow?
Excellent question.
No. I'm leaving the room.
The resident Italian recuses himself from the discussion. Right. Are there any politicians here before I continue? The answer is no, because the Torah does sanction polygamy. So,
Only for a man, though.
correct. Polygamy means, it would be more than one wife. Polyandry is the technical term for a woman who has more than one husband, but we call them politicians too. So, the situation would be like this. Because a woman, biblically speaking, is only permitted to marry one man at a time, she can get divorced and remarried, her husband can die. That can happen in more than one way. Even if she killed him, she could marry someone else. What that guy's getting into is a whole...
She would be Hayav Mita if she killed him.
Huh?
She would be Hayav Mita if she
It
killed
depends how many witnesses. We're going in circles.
Or it could be could have been a case where she was defending herself and was crazy.
Self-defense, maybe.
Self-defense.
Attacked her.
We didn't even think of it.
Self-defense. Oh, I actually recently heard a story like that about a woman who ended up in prison. She was 70-something. Her husband. What was the story? She was a maximum security prison in California. Her husband, which probably they get to play golf and plant trees in California. But why was she in this prison that was full of drug addicts and murderers and prostitutes? Because her husband of 30-something years decided one day he's getting up and he's leaving, just walking out. So she was shocked, she didn't know what to do, then she went to talk to him about maybe he can leave her the house, at least he can take his social security and find something else. Even this he refused. They got into a fight, he had a gun, and so she was so overcome with emotion that she took the gun out and she shot him, the story she tells. He's not here to tell a story. I don't know, but so yeah, situations like this arise. But in theory, it doesn't matter how her husband died or they got divorced or whatever. She can go ahead and remarry. That's fine. But the Torah permits a woman to marry one husband at a time. Yaakov Avinu was one example of he had 4 wives, even though 2 of them were sisters. And the Ramban explains that's why one of them died and they not allowed to marry sisters. Even non-Jews can't marry sisters. Yaakov,
He was married to
Leah, Rachel,
Yeah, and Bila and...
Bilhan, Zipporah. Yeah, married.
He was married to them?
Wives. They're still referred to as
But they were naked still.
Okay.
They were just his bedroom
concubines.
companions.
Right. Concubines.
Trying to say it in a nice way.
No, that's just political vocabulary. You try to use the biblical
He
one.
was actually married to them.
Good advice Chazal said is not to
I think it was a
for wives,
package
but
deal.
for
I think it was a package deal.
Right. So
Like,
the traditional understanding,
No, but it's true, no?
the traditional understanding is that they were actually married.
One you did too.
It was pre-Torah marriage, but we still understand it to mean that there was ketubah. I mean, they had all the rights and entitlements of marriage. The long story short, we don't have many examples of it, but that's one. So a man is not technically guilty of adultery if he, in other words, in the biblical sense, he's not guilty of adultery unless the woman he's cheating with is married.
Right.
And then he gets the same
Does he have
punishment.
to be married to women to get not considered adultery?
Married to which one?
Any of them.
Meaning, so he, regardless of his marital status,
There is a woman who's not married. Well, it's adultery if she's not married.
no, that would be just extramarital, like premarital or extramarital or postmarital relations. Yeah. It's not adultery by definition. If neither one is married to anybody, if it's only adultery, well, so the biblical definition of adultery is any man having relations with a married woman, except if it's his wife. Then he's a virgin. That's the long and short of it. So it makes him a jerk if that's not like just because the Torah doesn't prescribe capital punishment for it. And again, if a guy cheats with a married woman, they both get executed the same way. It's not like we cut him
And
a
the kid,
pass.
and the kid is a mamzer.
A child from a married woman who conceived from anyone but her husband would be a mamzer, with the sole exception of rape. If a woman who is married were violated against her will, even by a Jewish guy, the child is not a mamzer. It's only through consensual adultery or incest.
So wait, but a married man with a single girl.
The child is not a
Married man,
He's not a-
married man with a single girl is a jerk.
It's only a
That's-
But the son of a jerk is not a mamzer.
He's a jerk. There are other words for him on tape. Yeah. But he's a politician, if you want to put it that way. That's like the dirtiest word I used all day.
So, but the kid of the politician is not a mamzer.
Right. So he might. Right. So the kid would be born a politician technically. He wouldn't be born a mamzer. He would be
Why
born.
we so lucky on the ladies?
Yes, thank you.
Right. Well,
That's my real question.
it's. I didn't make this up. That's what's in the Torah.
No, I know, but
I can tell you that it's not done anymore outside of.
there has to be a reason.
Yemen. Yeah.
There's stories in Morocco last
But a
generation.
topic for discussion. So one potential situation, again, not the topic that I had in mind, but I'm more interested in what you're interested in. If well, in the situation, so consider the following situation. That's fine. Consider the following situation. A man is married to a woman who, for whatever reason, is not able to have children and would like to procreate nonetheless. Assuming we know that the challenge is more physiologically hers than physiologically his, would it be better that he take a second wife for the purpose of procreation, or that he leave the first one in order to follow up on that? So I'm not a woman and I don't play one on TV, but it's a difficult position.
I don't think that's also true because I know that there are men who have issues.
Oh no, for sure. I'm just saying this is one hypothetical situation where This is the, in fact, halakhically speaking, it's probably the only situation in which it's actually even advised. In other words, there's nowhere in the Gemara or in the Midrashim do you find anyone recommending anybody should marry more than one woman. We don't have even that many examples of it, and the poskim talk about this. The halakhic authorities they will point this out to you. There aren't that many examples from the Tanakh. There aren't that many examples in the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Midrashim, etc. As a matter of fact, almost all of the sages we know them to have had only one wife, and there are a few exceptions, but they're the exception and not the rule. The only situation in which you might find it halakhically advisable is the one that I just told you. So I don't know, and I probably never will, what the first wife would want or not want. I can tell you that's what Sarah told Abraham to do when she realized she couldn't have children. It wasn't like he said, I see this is not working out, but the housekeeper is right here. This was her advice.
You can understand how it seems right on their
I can definitely see, yes, the
the
same
so-called-
rules do not apply.
That's where I was coming.
Same rules do not apply. I get that. I did not make this up. Yeah, it's just that way. I can try to shed more light on the topic, but and we can discuss it. I'm not. The whole concept of polygamy and procreation, what have you, it's interesting. Well, so here's another thing. I'm totally out of left field, but I already said politician today, so we have to edit this whole thing. And Italian. So the shidduch crisis situation, right? Difficulty in finding a mate, etc. So I'm not saying I know what your average woman would say or what your average guy would feel. Well, I forgot what a guy would say, but presented with a situation in which there is a shortage of normal single men, right? Hypothetically, New York, and you want to find a solution to a demographic problem. So I can't clone men, and God knows most of them are certainly not worth it. But let's say I found a normal guy and I wanted to, which is very difficult to do. So there are a whole bunch of demographical issues at play. One of them is the fact that there is a disparity of almost 2% between male and female births, so there just are more women than men. Is what it is. There's also, men have higher mortality rates across the board. So car accidents are very predominantly male. I'm talking about the suicidal tendency that men have, so this is very concerning. Drug and alcohol addictions and overdoses are again, it's very skewed. 80% of the prison population is male. And whether or not that makes them capable or incapable, they're not very desirable as options for procreation. I'm not going to take a blind stab at the percentages of alternative orientations, but that doesn't help the picture much. I think, the risk of taking that a little bit far, I think even a woman who's not especially attracted to men can probably still conceive a child, whereas a man who's not especially attracted to women might find that difficult. We can discuss some other time. So the reality is that there are a lot less eligible men on the market than women. And that, again, feel free to take a survey, and I'd love to see evidence to the contrary. My experience is that when it comes to normal people, it gets even worse. That's just an anecdotal observation of mine. So monogamy is effectively saying there is a certain percentage of women that just mathematically won't get
Shut out of the class, yeah.
out of the picture altogether, or they're relegated to politicians, and that's I'd rather stay single. Or doesn't get it. So there's no conclusion. It's just an interesting question. Like what?
Should we do that?
Well, according to the overwhelming majority of halakhic opinions today, no. Just prepare to comfort a lot of women through single, and that's just the way it is. By the way, I didn't mention military deaths, but that's clearly very much male, a lot more so than female. So you have a conundrum. You have a situation. I mean, women have a much shorter window of fertility than men do. These are just multiplying factors of complications. So I don't pretend to have the solution. I can barely handle my own, day-to-day joys and challenges. But it's the kind of thing that it was brought up about 2 centuries ago, a century and a half ago. Is you have a lot more single women than men. Maybe this would actually be helpful. I don't know that your average woman would be, in favor. And is that, by the way, societally? I'll leave the question open, but do you think it's more productive from a societal standpoint to have a man married to 2 women who are both raising children than having single women who never got married, go through artificial means and have kids on their own without any man in the picture? Well, an invisible man in the picture. So there is historical precedent for a man having more than one wife. I guess having a husband is better than none, but that's very male math. And then knowing that you have a father as another wife is still probably better than not having a father at all. But that's almost conjecture. If you were to ask me logically what I think, I would say probably that makes more sense than what's more popularly done. I just don't know that. I know that what's commonly done is necessarily Halakhah condoned, but people do it anyway. So, is it better? Is it more productive? Is it, these are good questions. Really questions.
Also, just to add about you have to think about polygamy in terms of when it was, when this was all going on. This was a very patriarchal society, and then also on top of that, if you think about it, it was protection. It was in a woman's best benefit during that time to be married to a man, because if she did not have a family that could support her, and there's wars, there's a shortage of men, and getting married meant that there was she couldn't walk out just on her own. You had to have some sort of man around.
I think it's not just
much different than.
I don't know if it's purely cultural. Some of these factors were very much economical. It was just parnasa. Making a living was very difficult.
Also,
food was scarce and much more seasonal, seasonally
so
available.
it's loyalties in terms of the woman.
It was very difficult to raise kids. You didn't keep them at home until they were 40. I'm not going to say like Italians. That would be disgusting. We don't. You don't have the luxury of raising your kids until they feel like they're ready to go. So, traditionally people did get married younger. The expectation of the husband was that he'd be working. Security was definitely one aspect of that, because women out in the fields I don't think was necessarily a recipe for longevity. So yeah, there may have been a whole slew of reasons why it might have made more sense than it does now. In some aspects, that may or may no longer be the case. I just, like I said, yeah, no, I get that. I mean, in antiquity, and again, there are reasons why it's no longer done. Incidentally, just so you know, when polygamy was banned in Germany, anyway, by Rabbeinu Gershom, he's actually French. Give credit to the French. Imagine that. French Jews, anyway, banned polygamy. French non-Jews popularized adultery. Just the politicians, right?
Well,
Or a
the non-Jews
temple.
having polygamy at the time? At the ban? Or
Probably.
so this was a revolutionary concept?
Well, so in Europe, you're saying by Germany? Probably. I don't know. I know that it wasn't mentioned as one of the reasons why they stopped doing it, but it definitely wasn't practiced as commonly in European society as it was in Muslim society. You can insert jokes about European women and how difficult it is to get along with them, and there's a lot of truth to that. When it comes to 3 American girls left, okay. So in Germany, the reason it was
quiet.
in Germany, the reasons that were given for it were apparently emotional. It's a long story. I didn't mean to go this far off topic, but Rabbeinu Nissim comments on the Talmud, and he writes about this. It's an excommunication, really. So it's a decree of excommunication. A man who takes in Germany and France anyway. There weren't Jews in many other countries in Europe at the time. This would probably be modern day France, Germany, Switzerland. No, Poland was way later. Poland was like 400 or 500 years later. There were no Jews living that we know of anyway. So imagine that Germany was less hostile to the Jews than the Slavic regions were. So Rabbeinu Nissim writes in his commentary on Masechet Moed Katan, that's the tractate of Gemara that talks about, amongst other things, about half of it almost is dedicated to mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-G. So he says there that it's a known fact that Rabbeinu Gershom had himself more than one wife. Apparently, one of his wives ran away with a Christian, and that he must have felt that he maybe didn't, I don't know, spend enough time with her, or that there was some kind of a failure in the relationship, so he went ahead and banned polygamy across the board, which is pretty interesting. That was like an experience that he himself had. And interestingly enough, the Sephardi communities didn't really accept this, neither in Spain or Portugal or the Pyrenees Mountains. So naturally, the Sephardi was much better relationships. I guess the society was different. So it could be that in Christian society things function differently. Maybe the roads were better. Maybe the Parnassah was a little bit more predictable. Or it rains a lot more in Europe than it does in the Middle East or North Africa. That's for sure. Don't know. I can tell you that even in countries where it wasn't necessarily forbidden, it wasn't exactly common either. Even in Yemen, it wasn't the majority. And in countries like Morocco, Iraq, Iran, or Tunisia, more often than not, it was for one of two reasons. It was either because a man is married to a woman for 10 years, they live in the same place, unable to have children, so again, the logic being probably it's better to be married than not to be married. So the first wife would probably at least prefer that. Or that yibum, levirate marriage. That's if two brothers, the guy is married, he has at least one brother, he dies without children, so there's a mitzvah for his brother to marry the widow if they get along, and if they don't, they can just not get married. That's fine. There's a process for that too. But that is the only biblical example of a mitzvah to marry a particular woman. So technically, yes, everybody has to get married. Who do you marry? It's up to you. In this particular case, this is the only place where the Torah actually implies that there's like a mitzvah, not just to getting married, but to marry this particular woman. The Torah says if she's older and he's younger, if he's older and she's younger, then they would dissuade them from that. So clearly there were limits. It wasn't like everyone. That's actually where you find some really good pieces of advice about marriage in general. Just because there's a mitzvah doesn't mean that the rest of them are going to work out.
If a married man cheats someone's wife with a married woman, and they both divorce, are they allowed to marry each other?
No.
Why not?
Even today?
Because from the Sultana we learn it says 3 times, she secluded herself and she became impure. And the Gemara says, why is that repeated 3 times? It's in the hypothetical discussion of what happens if she secluded herself and became impure. So the Gemara says that once is to forbid her from her husband. A woman who cheated on her husband is no longer allowed to come back to him, even if he forgives her. It's just they can't be married anymore.
It's not accurate anymore.
What's that?
That's accurate nowadays.
100%.
Wait, is it a known fact that a woman cheated on his husband?
It's forbidden.
They can't stay together.
Correct. If you happen to know of a particular situation that needs discussion,
That's crazy.
crazy. I just read that right out of the Torah. I mean, she became impure. The Gemara says, what does that mean? It means that she can't go back to her husband. She also can't marry the second guy. Yeah. Oh, sorry. She also can't marry the adulterer.
Can marry anyone, right?
Well, she can marry anyone but them and the Kohen. And that's the third one is for Terumah, that she's not allowed to eat from the Terumah. Even if she was married to a Kohen and she cheated on him, then she can't eat from the turuma. Even if they stayed married and just didn't live together, she still couldn't eat from the turuma because
Why can't she marry the guy she's not affair with?
because the Torah finds that reprehensible behavior and doesn't reward her or him for extramarital affairs. So she's considered impure both to her husband and to him. It's forbidden to officiate such a wedding. By the way, don't put it past me to have encountered this. I once,
And Jamaica.
When I was-
very well.
well-known case of, what do you know, the Swiss.
And yeah.
We were just talking about European women.
And I think they got married.
Well,
And
I
they're
hope it wasn't a
religious.
rabbi that, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's messy.
Oh, that's crazy.
So, well, there's a situation that I remember once personally where when I was on the more active on the get writing circuit, every so often because I was young, now I'm like 80. They used to. I would write the gittin that nobody wanted to write. So the jail, courthouse, middle of the night kind of happy situation. So. Every so often it was just a matter of traveling. Like we have a situation, so a rabbi from Westport, Connecticut would call and he would say, I have a couple that needs a get. And we'd say, fine, usually we try to do at least two. So if it's a matter of like a few weeks or a few months, if they can wait patiently, we'd rather go for two than go for one. It's a big shlet, it's like 2 hours to get there and to get back. So there was a situation once where I came, they asked me to write, they said, we have 2 gittin for today. I said, sure. And we had... So couple number 1 and couple number 2. And I wrote the get for couple number 1, and the guy sticks around for the get of couple number 2, which is bizarre because you would expect a little bit of privacy. Well, I mean, they both came to the same business at the same shul we were writing in. So okay, so couple number 1, we finished that get, and he just stays for the after party. There's another couple going through a divorce. It's not a very happy situation. But he's there, and then after her husband leaves, like, they walk out together. As if,
Oh my goodness.
No, and then there's another layer of crazy on all of this, which is that they both got divorced on the same day, very apparently for the very same reason, and they wanted to commission a ketubah. They wanted me to write them a ketubah, like in the same writing and on the same paper that the get was written on. I didn't understand why, but apparently...
It's a week 90 days though, right?
No, 90 days was the least of their problems. That was... But it's just funny, I was so naive. I was like, I know you must have had a difficult marriage the first time out. I'm sorry it didn't work out. So quickly though, like, they didn't even drive.
I knew right away when you said he was waiting around, like,
He meant to do that.
Yeah.
He met in the waiting room.
They met in the waiting room. I mean, so you could judge favorably. They knew each other from before. Yeah. Very good.
Inspiring. We'll talk actually about Mishri and about Kashrut.
That's the God's help. We'll talk more about this one witness thing in God's help next week. Yes, in a different set of examples and circumstances.
Halakhah.